Aging is something we all do every day, but it's not something we're comfortable talking about or planning for. After helping my grandmother make the transition from living at home to moving into an assisted living facility, I learned that we could have made this process so much easier for her and for the rest of us if we'd done better planning, or at least had some of those scary conversations years earlier. So to help you do better than my family did, I sat down with our expert advisor, Sally Russell, to get some advice on this sometimes sticky subject. Sally has been a nursing professional for more than 35 years, working as both a nurse and a nurse educator. Her passion for helping people comes through in everything that she does. We are so delighted to have the chance to get her practical and compassionate insight into managing the aging process for our loved ones and for ourselves, particularly when it comes to talking about these things that nobody wants to talk about. Let's get into it. So my grandmother is 89 years old. She turned 89 in May. She went from living with her parents to living with my grandfather. And so she really got on her own, when my grandfather died. And then my mother my mother just turned 70. And I've been trying to have these conversations, and nobody wanted to have these conversations. My mom didn't want to have the conversation. Grandma absolutely did not want to have the conversation. She lives in her house that she owns. But some of the cousins and I are like, I don't know, we need to get this going. And then the pandemic happened. Then she fell in May and broke some ribs. She didn't break a hip, which we thought was good. And it really went downhill fast from there as far as her just not even feeling like moving. I mean, she was already depressed because
she can't go anywhere and pandemic
we had to start having conversations. We went on a family vacation to the Oregon coast with my parents, and my mom usually is the one who checks in on grandma like every day. And she had her friend checking in, but grandma wasn't answering the phone when anybody called. Like Diana had to kind of break into the house. My mom gave her a key and check in, and grandma was just sitting in her chair, not getting dressed, not eating. And so we're like, we need to take some different kind of action here. And it was really hard to have to do it under crisis and to have to force these conversations when everybody's not in the best frame of mind to have it. And my son, he's worked with assisted living and long-term care. And so he's been very helpful with certain things, and she feels comfortable to talk to him. So we have 4 generations here trying to resolve this problem. And it's been way rougher than I think any of us were prepared for.
Yeah. None of us want to think about that. We want to think, I'm going to be really healthy forever. And, and it just, it doesn't, it doesn't go that way. And it really is better to be prepared if you can, or at least to start the thinking. And it's not necessarily that we're asking anybody to make decisions right now.
Yeah.
What we're asking is tell me what you want. What are your wishes about care? Do you want to be at home? Can you envision living in a different place than you're in now? Those conversations and having them beforehand, rather than, like you said, now it's an emergency, you've broken a hip and now you're going to have to go somewhere and you weren't the least bit, we hadn't even talked about it. So there is that.
Is it ever too early to talk about plans and these types of decisions that we're going to have to make?
It really isn't ever too early, although sometimes it's sort of like, well, it's so far out. If you start as a teenager, you can't even think about, like my 16-year-old granddaughter said the other day, because somebody was asking what she wants to do in college. And she said, I don't know what I want to do this afternoon. But I think once we're at adulthood, I think it's never too early to at least think about it. And actually it's the same kind of process about making a will. Where do you want your house to go? Who do you want to get your china? All of those things are things that it's sometimes easier to lead into it with those kinds of questions that, if you thought about your stuff, you've got some nice stuff here. If you thought about who you would like to have that, ask, talk, ask. So just ask a question and then talk and then ask another question. And so it's sort of like, well, who do you want to have? Who would you like to make sure that your china goes to? We need to start making a list. Mm-hmm. And those kinds of things, if, whether that gets attached to a will or it's just that somebody knows. And that sometimes so then if you ask and then you talk about that, and then it's a little bit easier to ask the next question and then ask the next question and make it be part of everyday conversation, as opposed to we need to sit down and have this really serious talk about what you want to have happen at the end of life. But there does come a point, and your grandmother's at that point, because of her age, and now she's fractured ribs, is that how do you envision the end of your life, and how do you envision do you think staying here is having somebody stay with you? How would you feel about having somebody come in and help you with whatever?
One thing I've noticed with my grandmother that's been the biggest thing is that she feels like she doesn't have any control. Like she's losing more and more control, and that feels awful. And she feels like, so-and-so talks to me like I'm a baby, and she has really bad hearing, and people are talking, and I can't hear what's going on. And so she feels really out of control. So I think things that can put control in their hands over something probably makes a big difference. I also liked when you said, make it part of everyday conversation. So I thought about that with my kids. When I was raising my kids, talks about drugs and talks about, sex, and talks about bullying and all that. Anytime there was an opportunity, I would just talk about it and make it normal, whether it was something that came up in a song or something we saw on TV or in a movie.
And we don't think about it when we're thinking about end of life care or care, what are the goals for our care? We don't think about that. We think that has to be like this big, hairy conversation. But you're right. It's just like, oh, something came up and we, let's follow that, instead of saying, well, someday we'll talk about that more. So I totally agree with you. Sometimes there's things that, because of the knowledge that you have, and I'm sure your cousins all have different kind of knowledge, it brings you into other conversations. My father-in-law died of ALS 25 years ago, maybe longer than that. But and it was just one of those, I was sitting with my mother-in-law, and she said, well, they asked us about doing a living will. So we were, so that just kind of led into that conversation. She said, and we're not going to put him on a ventilator. And it's like, with ALS, you have to think about that. Because with ALS, so he's there struggling to breathe. It's not because people think of being like that on a ventilator as being, okay, that's the very end when you're being coded or whatever. And with some disease processes, you're suffocating. And is that, we may need to think, we didn't have to, that didn't happen with him, but it all of a sudden made me think that there are some things that sometimes we need to clear up some misconceptions about what some medical things may or may not be, that for some people with ALS, a ventilator is a way to still allow them a good quality of life, because there's the little tiny ventilators. You don't have to have the big ones because so much of what people know, they only know from television. That's the kind of beauty about that ask thing, is because then you talk and then it's, there's another avenue that we need to go down. And it can just be in conversation. It doesn't have to be, let's have a formal sit down, like you said. So, but it takes intentionality on our part to do that, because you have to ask that first question. It's like, okay, what kind of non-stressful question can I ask that might lead us to other more stressful things? The big thing that for your grandmother, it's that she has control of what happens, and she may not have total control, because if she falls and breaks a hip, then she can't stay in her house. She's going to have to go somewhere, because she's going to need more help than there would be there. But for normal everyday, for as long as we can, we will support you in that. But that if you start falling and it becomes a safety factor, then we may have to make another decision, but we will support you in whatever way. However, if you're going to be at home, maybe we need to think about getting a home health aide. Maybe we need to think about getting into physical therapy that comes in. Depends on the insurance and whether any of that's available. But we need to talk to your healthcare provider to see, to see what resources there are. And most healthcare providers will know, and I want to put a plug in for this, is that you need to find a social worker, because social workers are the ones who know what the resources are out in the community more than physicians do. They don't know, like Meals on Wheels, or there's another group that does stuff like that. And you don't have to be in hospice care for those things to take place. So are there resources that we haven't even thought about that would make it easier for her to be at home for as long as she can?
And where would you find a social worker? Like, my thought was going to like aging services.
Aging services does have some, and the aging services should have people. In fact, they're probably a really good resource to at least get that started. But if some physician practices, especially if they're taking care of the elderly or the people with lots of health issues, will have one. I know, given where I've spent most of my life working, there was always one in the hospital that I could just go, ask a quick question. And they're usually open, to that. But aging services might be a good place to start.
So I would say when you get to are there 3 or 4 things? Are there any must-have things that always need to be addressed? I mean, if you can get to them eventually, like, are there some things that are kind of universal that are worth putting on that list of things to ask into?
2 of them I can think of right off the bat. One of them is the will, the living will. There's the will about what you want to have happen with your stuff, but there's also the living will. If something happens, what do I want to be coded? I mean, do I want them to come in and do CPR? And that includes things like if I'm really truly at, and it's, this is sort of one of those now, if you were to be, you're not, and this is just in the future, if you were to be terminally ill, do you want to have, and it's stuff like, do you want to be fed with a tube or not? Because that's life sustaining. Do you want to, if you have an infection, do you want antibiotics or not? Because that's life sustaining. And some people say, you know what? The antibiotics might make me sicker than the infection's making me. So it's things like that. So that would be one, to think about that when it really truly is, and to talk about that several months, years ahead of time is so much easier than waiting until, okay, now you've just been told you've got 6 months to live and we need to talk about this stuff, because then it's too emotional.
Yes.
And then the second thing is to really make sure that you get a dedicated person who's legally able to make decisions at the end, so that
yes.
And we did it in my family for my parents. We did 2 of us. One that was, what's the term for that? I had it when I started this whole sentence and now it's gone.
Is it power of attorney?
It's like a power of attorney. But there's another term for it. They used one. It's the power of attorney is the one that my brother was, because that was in charge of her finances.
Yes.
So he was the one who could make decisions and go to the bank, and we had his name on stuff, because it all gets frozen, if something happened. But then I was the power of attorney for healthcare. So it's the healthcare advocate. So if something happened, I can make the decisions about what we were going to do, what we couldn't do when she was no longer able to do that, or my dad was no longer able to make those decisions. And that's helpful, because then you don't have cousins and people who are feeling guilty about, I've not come to visit her for 6 months, and no, you have to keep her alive and you have to do everything, and they're dealing with their guilt rather than what's best for her.
Right.
So if there isn't, I can think of those 2 things that we really need to make sure that everybody has.
And I don't know, is there anything you can do if someone just refuses to talk about things? Like, I don't know what you can do.
I don't know. I mean, we all have to do the best that we can do. And in that situation, probably the one thing that you need to do is to get that medical power of attorney, so that it's not just random, whatever happens, because there will be some decisions that somebody's going to need to make at some point in time. So if you don't get anything else done, get that.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because that's when the decisions are going to get, and it's hard. There's when it gets, if it gets to a point where it's really not safe for her to be home alone, but she refuses to admit that, there's times when you just have to, because you can't, if there's nobody that can live with her to protect her 24/7.
Right.
So.
Well, I really want to thank Sally once again for taking the time to have this important chat with me about end of life and aging at home conversations, which can be so difficult to have. Obviously, it's an issue very close to me at the moment, and it has given me so much insight into how important it is to extend that proactive safety lifestyle into topics like this. I tell you, it's way easier and a lot more fun to plan for things like a new baby than it is to plan for getting older or possibly getting sick. So I really hope this conversation helps any of you who are going through this with your loved ones. And I want to let you know that we'll be supplying more tips and advice and space for conversations like this on this channel, on Safewise.com, and in our Ask Safewise Facebook group. You can get all of our links in the description box below. If you want to get more involved or have any specific questions you would like us to address, leave a comment and use the hashtag AskSafeWise. Thanks so much for joining me, and until next time, keep your loved ones close and safe.